All right, let's open our Bibles to 2 Samuel chapter 14. I don't know if you remember this, but 2 weeks ago, back before singing night, I think I mentioned that I did not intend for this chapter, 2 Samuel 14, to take up 3 class periods. I never would have foreseen that. I wouldn't have predicted that. But the discussion has been so good. It really has. And particularly 2 weeks ago during our last class period together, it was so good that it's moved over into the 3rd week. And so we're very thankful for that. We want to encourage your discussion of it even here tonight. Move down with me to verse 25. We're on the back of these sheets, by the way. Section number 3, Absalom, a man to be reckoned with. Really, our title, I thought I was helping, describes the first 2 sections, verses 1 through 24. And Joab thought he was helping by trying a little plan to get David to realize that he needed to bring Absalom home, so forth and so on. And yet, now we come to somewhat of a parenthesis. Okay, if you're reading a book or a novel and the writer's writing along and then all of a sudden he puts something in parentheses, then what you know is going on is it's kind of a side thought. It's a little bit of a departure from where he was headed, but it's a side thought that somehow relates. It still relates normally, but it's just a side thought. That's the best way I know to put it. Someone tell me, why will the writer take these 9 verses, verses 25 through 33, why will he take these 9 verses to tell us so much about Absalom? Why? Okay, all right. To get you to look at things maybe from Absalom's perspective, that's one idea. Why else? Okay, Abby, what's going to happen in the coming chapter? A lot of stuff. Okay, and treason, that's right. He's going to rebel against his own father. He's going to lead a rebellion throughout the nation of Israel. Heavy stuff next chapter. And so this helps us to be prepared for that. So pick up with me now at chapter 14 and verse 25. Now in all Israel there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his what? All right, his beauty. New King James says, for his good looks. Okay? Absalom apparently was a good-looking man. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. Now, you might think of a lot of things when you hear that. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. Someone might say, well, he was pretty. You know, he's a good-looking man. One thing that comes to my mind is he must have never worked. That's what I thought of. And, of course, being the king's son, then that's likely the case. He probably had not done much work in his life. Why is his appearance important, and why does the inspired writer tell us about his appearance? What's the big deal? Okay, Saul was the first king of the United Kingdom, the first king of Israel, and it was mentioned about his appearance also, and particularly, what about Saul's stature? All right, he was head and shoulders above pretty much everybody else in Israel. So why this emphasis on the outward appearance of these rulers or potential rulers? Why? Okay, people like good-looking men, Gwen said. Not all people, Gwen. I don't really care about good-looking men, but I know what you mean. And what was said back here? I'm sorry? Oh, my. Wow. Wow. I don't know what to say about that, Mike. Woo, boy. All right, you got me off track. Am I red? All right. Uh, yeah. Well, I think, David, that possibly is a secondary thing. That is a moral that we can glean from this reading. Here's a man that outwardly he has everything going for him, and as David's getting to with us, he's a flop. I mean, he's a miserable flop because of his sin and his wickedness. I think that's a secondary thing. What I'm driving at, and I'm not going to ask any more questions. I'm afraid I might get more answers. But what I'm driving at is, in ancient times especially, what did people want in their rulers and in their leaders? They wanted good-looking leaders. They wanted good-looking leaders. Now, not so much, not to the same extent in this day and time, but is it not still the case, at least to some extent, that political rulers and leaders and things like that, don't the ones who have an attractive appearance, oftentimes don't they have more success? They do. And when you get into the very high levels of politics, I understand that many people have handlers. What do we mean by handlers? Hey, you're going to wear this. This is the tie you're going to wear. This is the pantsuit you're going to wear. Don't say this, say that. Yeah, tell you what to do, how to dress. And so we still have that to some extent. Maybe not as much as they did in ancient times, but we still have that. Now, we read this description in verse 25, and we're going to continue reading on into this. And when, Lord willing, next week, when we get into chapter 15, as Abby told us a moment ago, I want you to be able to appreciate why a man in Absalom's shoes could have such rapid success in doing something that he shouldn't be doing. Okay? Just keep that in mind. Normally, good-looking people, do they have a way of winning people over to their side? They can. Some people are quite skilled in it. Okay? And so just keep that in mind. Verse 26 here. And when he cut the hair of his head, at the end of every year he cut it because it was heavy on him. When he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels according to the king's standard. Raise your hand if that means anything to you. I couldn't raise mine either. Say what, Gwen? He had a lot of hair, okay? Basically, now this might not sound like a lot until you think about it. Basically, maybe about 4 pounds. 3 to 4 pounds of hair, okay? That's a head of it right there now. You know, remember used to when your bags of sugar were always what? They used to be 5 pounds. I went to our pantry the other day. I found a bag of sugar, and I picked it up, and it's this little bitty thing, and it's 4 pounds. Okay, they've cut down to 4 pounds of sugar now. Think about that weight. And if you had that in hair, that's a lot of hair. And that's every year. In 1 year's growth, his hair would grow that thickly, and he would get it cut. So this man, he had some locks, to say the least. Verse 27, to Absalom were born 3 sons and 1 daughter whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of beautiful appearance. Sometimes do we see good looks run in families? We do. It's linked, of course, to genetics. And so here he has 1 daughter, and she's of beautiful appearance. By the way, after whom do you think did Absalom name his daughter? He named her Tamar. Who was Tamar? His sister. That's right. You go back in the earlier chapter, and this is the one that Amnon raped. He forced himself upon Tamar, Absalom's full sister, and it seems that Absalom named his daughter, apparently, after her. Now, verse 28, and Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem. But what does the end of verse 28 tell us? He did not see the king's face. What's our modern expression? For 2 full years, where was Absalom? He was in the what? He was in the doghouse. He was in the doghouse. He had been in exile up in Geshur, but now he finally comes home. But even when he comes home, he's still in the doghouse. He can't see Daddy. He can't go have an audience with the king for 2 full years. Verse 29, therefore Absalom sent for Joab. Now, Absalom sent for Joab. Before I read another line, just tell me 2 things about Joab. Any 2 things we know about Joab? Okay, Joab's the reason Absalom's back home. True or false? That's pretty much true. That's the first part of this chapter. So one thing we know about Joab, he's the reason that Absalom's back in the homeland. Somebody give me something else about Joab. Very loyal to David. That's a good one while we're on a roll. All right, that's what David said too. Okay, would any of us in our modern terminology, would we look at Joab and we say, he's a pretty bad man? Would we say that? Yeah. Later on. But in his own right, Joab's a pretty tough character. Okay? He was the commander-in-chief of David's forces, commander-in-chief. Joab, by so many estimates, he's a bad man. He's a bad man. And yet notice how Absalom treats him, which tells us something about Absalom too. Therefore Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king. In other words, Joab, I'm ready to go see my daddy. But Joab would not come to Absalom. And when he sent again the second time, he would not come. Now, put yourself in the shoes of Joab here. Did Joab run a political risk with his little scheme earlier in this chapter? He did. I mean, if David had been in a different mood, David could have looked at Joab and the wise woman of Tekoa, and he could have said, you two tried to make me look like a fool. David could have said that. Okay? So Joab has run his neck out for Absalom already, and now that he's been successful, thankfully David was all right with it. He didn't, there weren't any real repercussions for Joab that we read about. But maybe Joab is like, now, okay, I want to keep my distance. I've got the heir back home. God forbid, but if something were to happen to David, we've got an heir. He's back home, but I'm going to keep my distance. That appears to be maybe what Joab's thinking is. And so Absalom sends for him these 2 times, and he doesn't come. So, verse 30, so he, Absalom, said to his servants, Absalom's servants, see, Joab's field is near mine, and he has barley there. Go and do what? Ooh, is this a big deal? Do like this. That's a big deal, okay? This is still an agricultural economy. Their economy runs on agriculture. They're dependent on their crops and on their fields. And this was a lucrative thing. There was money in this. But he tells his servants, Absalom does, you go and set Joab's field on fire and burn it. And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Verse 31, then Joab arose and came to Absalom's house. Oh, look, who showed up? Look who's come. And said to him, why have your servants set my field on fire? And Absalom answered Joab, look, I sent to you saying, come here so that I may send you to the king to say, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to be there still. Finish the thought, even though it's not written. It would be better for me to still be in Geshur than what? Than to be home and to stay in the doghouse. Dad, what difference does it make? I'm back home. I still haven't seen you in 2 years. And so he says, I sent to you with this message. I wanted you to help me to get into my dad. Now notice the end of verse 32. Now therefore let me see the king's face, But if there is iniquity in me, let him execute me. Let's put this in our own words. Basically, what is he saying right there at the end of verse 32 to Joab? Either A or B. Either A, let me see my dad, the king, or B, what? Kill me. Kill me. In so many words. He's to the point, whether sincerely or not, I'm not sure, but at least in his words, he's to the point that he says, look, if dad wants to kill me, let him kill me. But I'm ready to appear before the king. All right, Mike? I do. I just don't know the answer.
He thought he was helping. And he was. I instigated and not bring to fruition, but sooner back out. I don't have an answer.
I don't. Any thoughts on that? I guess it's time. That makes pretty good sense. What other thoughts? Yeah. Is that what you're thinking, Jimmy? Okay. In other words, I've kind of spent my what's it called, political credibility or political clout. I've kind of spent that, and I need to back off. That makes sense, right? Mm.
I think he more, probably could see more than what David's acceptance of that.
Mm.
Not pleased. Moab has something to do with this. Okay? Go along with this. Here's my decision. Not see. In other words,
That ties in with what Mickey was saying. In other words, I've gone this far, but I know not to go any further. Yeah. Yeah.
David is cooling off, but he needs more time. Are we talking about solely Joab just backing out of the picture? Initiates and backs away. I think Joab just figured I'll push this as far as I can. If I go to him another time and say, why have you not seen your son since we brought him back? David might not be as hospitable or as accepting of Joab's question as he was when he set him up with the wise woman. I think he thought, I can't push this issue any farther.
All right, let's drive a peg. Let me say two things before they roll out of my head here. Out of all the people in Israel, who do you think knows David better than Joab? Not many. Not many. Possibly nobody. So Joab knows David really well. They basically came from the same hometown, Bethlehem. He knows them really well. Brad's saying, look, we're reading this out of black and white. We're reading this out of a text. But Joab was standing there looking at David when David gave his answer, you know. And if David has gone as far in this as he's going to go, Joab would have recognized that, potentially. Okay, that's one thing. Now, here's another thing. Mike, you bring up the question of reconciliation. And Abby waited till after class one week to come up here and share this with me, as I recall. And this was a marvelous comment about David. The pattern we see in David is that he does what? He puts things off. He puts things off. He'll let things happen, and once things happen, he'll put off dealing with it. And I had never thought about that before. I had never seen that before. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, Abby came up and shared that with me after class. And that's true. I don't know, Mike, I bring that up at this point. I don't know that David wants any further reconciliation. You know, part of David is still angry, perhaps, that Absalom killed the crown prince, Amnon. Part of David is perhaps still embarrassed the way Joab and the woman of Tekoa made him look. The crown prince is back home. Absalom's back home, the new crown prince. If something happens to me, we've got a ruler, like David kind of said a moment ago too. But I don't know that David wants to pursue anything else, because he has demonstrated a history of just letting things slide and not dealing with stuff to conclusion or to closure. And so maybe all of these things factor in. I'd never really thought about that till Mike posed the question, but there's a lot that we can sink our teeth into. Is any of this helpful for us in our own personal relationships? Yes, all of it is. I mean, so much of this we can look at, and there might be aspects of our lives that we look at ourselves and, oh, okay, I've been in this situation. I see how David's handled this. I either need to imitate that or I need to do better. I don't need to do what David did.
Mm-hmm. As I pointed out a couple of weeks ago, mercy that God showed David, David shows to Absalom.
Right. I think maybe the thing to put a bow on that, Mike, and to leave this where it is once again, it takes Joab's coming to David to prompt this. You know, he's willing to just kind of let his son live out in limbo, apparently, until Joab comes back and says, look, now it's been 2 years. Are you ready to see him?
And that's another common trait in all those situations. Push things off and leave them, let them go. And most in time, it's somebody else that has to bring the situation in.
You're right. And you or somebody, back when we had this discussion, you said that then, and that's a great point. It's almost like in these situations, David has to have somebody come along finally and push him over, you know, and say, hey, do this. And that's kind of what we see here.
He didn't show very much initiative.
No, he did not show very much initiative at crucial times in certain areas. Dayton?
The likeness of David fighting with himself. I know my son's broken the law. I know he's supposed to die because of what the law says. Or do I just let him live his life? Fighting with that, knowing that he's in town, knowing that if he sees him, he's guilty of breaking that same law by letting him live. What do you think the possibility of fighting with himself over that?
Well, I don't know if I would say it exactly that way, Dayton, but I do agree that there's a struggle going on inside David, yes. I think that's definitely part of it. I was thinking about Mike's bringing up, and accurately so, here in a few chapters when Absalom is finally killed, I mean, David is crushed. That David is devastated. So there's a side of David that is so affectionate, so loving of his son, and yet there has to be another side inside of David that is repulsed by the evil that Absalom has done. And so, I would definitely say there's got to be inner strivings and inner struggles in the heart of David. Well, I don't know if he trusts him or not, Gwen, but I can tell you what, we're going to learn in the next chapter, he didn't need to trust him, did he? All right, verse 33, let's read this and we'll go to our sheets. So Joab went to the king after Absalom gets his attention by burning his barley field. He goes to the king and told him. And when he had called for Absalom, that is, the king had called for Absalom, he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. Then the king kissed him. You know, this right here really bothers me. What bothers me in verse 33 is not the reconciliation of a father and a son. That doesn't bother me. What bothers me is when a man bows himself to the ground, he puts his face on the ground. What's that a symbol of? Submission. A symbol of submission. What do we see in the next chapter? Yeah, rebellion. The exact opposite of submission. So that's what bothers me. I'm glad for whatever, or to whatever extent, I'm glad father and son may be reconciled. But boy, it just really bothers me. And what we're seeing here is we're seeing a glimpse into whose true character? Absalom's. Yes. We've already learned a lot about David in the earlier chapters, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. We've learned a lot about David's character, and we still are learning some things. But right here, we're learning a lot about Absalom's character. All right, in our last 5 or 6 minutes, let's look at our sheets here, section number 3. The inspired writer now interjects some information regarding Absalom's handsome what? Appearance. Some information about his appearance and his family, and that's provided so that one might see how Absalom could quickly gain such favor with the people as we're about to read about in the next chapter. And by the way, you know the hair weighed about 4 pounds, 3 to 4 pounds. And what's interesting, if you want to make a note of this, we read there that he had how many sons? 3 sons and 1 daughter. But apparently, guess what happened with his 3 sons? Apparently, they all died in youth, or they died before their time, because later on in chapter 18, a statement's going to be made that Absalom had no sons. Okay? So that's a tragedy to think about. He had 3 sons here, but 4 chapters later, he has none. And was it uncommon in ancient times for children and youth to die? No, it wasn't. Happened way more often, thankfully, than it does now. So that's just an interesting little fact to file away. Number 2, Absalom remained in the doghouse for how long? 2 full years. So if you combine that with his time, his exile in Geshur, this means that Absalom did not see David for a total of how many years? 5. Very good, David. 5 years total, because he was in Geshur 3, and then he came home for 2 more. All right, number 3. Absalom sent for Joab how many times? Twice. Therefore, so that Joab might bring him, and you can read the rest of that. Joab ignored it, and we discussed, I think we had some really good comments on potentially why Joab would not come. Number 4, Joab was a man to be what? He was a man to be feared in his own right. Joab was a man of war. He was a pretty bad dude, pardon the expression. But evidently, Absalom was not afraid of him. To get his attention, Absalom had his servants to set Joab's what? Barley field on fire. So, yes, Absalom is the king's son. Yes, there is a high degree of immunity that would have gone along with that. You think about diplomatic immunity over here. Some high-ranking official comes to this country and they can get away with a lot. They can break a lot of laws and we can't touch them because they have diplomatic immunity. And yes, Absalom had a great degree of that, so to speak, but even at that, he's pretty bold. Absalom is still pretty bold to get Joab's attention in this way. Number 5, Absalom protests that it would have been better to remain in Geshur than to continue to be banned from the what? The face or the presence of the king. Okay, number 6, Absalom demands to see the king even if it means his own what? His own execution, his own death, either word. Death is shorter, so use it. His own death. Now note the possible reasons why Absalom did not fear being executed. A, perhaps because David would think himself to be in no position to punish Absalom for murder, having killed whom? Uriah himself. So that's letter A. Perhaps David would have thought that way. Letter B, perhaps David would deem the crime of Amnon to be worthy of death. What did Amnon do before Absalom ever killed him? He raped his half-sister. That's right. He raped his half-sister Tamar. Perhaps David would deem that to be a crime worthy of death. So just 2 reasons there why Absalom might not really be afraid of dying. Now let me ask another question that I don't have on the sheet. Why is it such a big deal that Absalom get restored to the court? I mean, you're back home, Absalom. You're living a prince's life. Everybody's waiting on you hand and foot. You've got it pretty good. Why is it so critical that you get restored to the court? Okay, so that he would be in position even if he didn't want to wait. He's already in line. He's in line, but like this, he's got to wait, see. I really think it's significant. I think he's already planning ahead something like what's going to happen in chapter 15. And he needs to be restored to public favor so that he'll be in a position to get the people worked up in the next chapter. Okay, so that's pretty significant. Number 7, Absalom is what to the king at the end? He's reconciled. He's reconciled to the king and restored to his place in the court, but storm clouds would soon be gathering. All right. Very great discussion, folks. I enjoy this so much on Wednesday nights, Sunday afternoons, and Wednesday nights especially. I just really enjoy your comments. Thank you so much, and we're dismissed. Lord willing, we'll see you Sunday morning.